I'm getting ready to install the connecting rods in this R100RS, and I thought I'd show you a little bit about what's involved. First thing to notice is that this rod has an R, meaning it came off the right side of the engine, and I want to install them on the side they came from. The other thing to note is that the rods are broken into two halves. So this is the rod end cap, and this is the rod itself. And the way they go together is, you'll see on the rod there's two pins, and they match up with the holes here on the end cap. So they go together, and it's a very tight fit. So you have to get them aligned and very carefully get them to go together. So then in here is going to be the main journal on the crankshaft. Now the other thing to notice about the design is that the pins on the rod, here we go, are on one side of the rod. Now when I install the rods in the engine, I want the side with the pins to point to the front of the engine. So I've marked an arrow here up on the little end of the rod to remind me that that's the way I want it to face when I install it. Now the other thing I had done was put new small end bushings, which is where the wrist pin to connect the pistons fits, and those are reamed, and the new wrist pin, they were reamed to match it, so that's got an L on it as well. And this is a slip fit, but when I install it, I'll chill the wrist pin so it'll slide right in. But that'll go like that. Now I don't need to worry about the wrist pin when I install the connecting rods. That'll be something I play with when I put the top end together. Now I'm going to install new rod bearings that go on the crankshaft, and these I've already installed in this rod, so they fit right flush with the face on both halves of the rod. Now the thing to note about that is that in the rod there's a groove cut here and a groove cut in the end cap as well, and those match up with the grooves in the new bearing insert, and they basically just go in as a press fit like that. And sometimes you have to push them a little so they'll line right up on the end. And then the same drill for putting this one in the cap is set it up so that they line up in the groove, and then you just press them down evenly so they're in place, and then when you connect them on the pins, they'll line right up just like that. Now one other thing is the rods are connected together, the two halves, through a special bolt, which is the rod bolt. These bolts are used once because they stretch. So as soon as you take apart the connecting rod, you throw the old ones in the trash, and these are brand new. And they have a very special face here that takes a special tool to install, and they go in just straight through like that to capture the two halves. This is the special tool you use to install those rod bolts, and it'll fit right in to the head here like that. So when I torque them, I use this on the end of my wrench. When I install the rods, I use some special lubricants. This is an engine assembly lube with moly graphite, and that's an important additive because it protects the bearing when the engine first starts. So I'll lube the bearing half shells with that quite liberally, also the crankshaft journal. The other thing that needs some lubrication is the rod bolts, and they should be lubricated on the bolt thread and on the threads in the end cap before you torque them. So the torque settings are actually with lubricated threads, but the lubrication isn't engine oil, it's a light oil like 3-in-1. So that's also what I need to do when I do the assembly. So I'm going to lubricate the bearing shell. Put a fair amount of the graphite in there. Smear it around. Get it nice and lubricated. And the same thing here on the other half of the shell. Okay. Now the other thing that needs to be lubricated is the rod bolt. So I'll put some 3-in-1 on it. Get that all in the threads. And a little bit here on the other one. And we'll throw a little bit on the end cap threads. And so everything's lubricated and ready for installation. So I have placed a rag at the bottom of the opening on the engine block. In case I drop the rod, I don't want to nick that case, because if I get a nick in it, it's going to leak oil. So I'm just being a little bit cautious. I have also lubricated the crankshaft journal, and I find if you put the engine at about top dead center, that makes the throw as far over as you need it. Now the other thing is to remember that the rod's going to go in with the arrow to the front of the engine, which is this way, and that means the pin on the rod and on the end cap are also going to point this way. So when I put the rod end cap on, I want to make sure the holes are pointing to the front of the engine. And the way I do that is I just slide it onto the journal and rotate it about like that, and use my finger just to hold it. And then I bring the rod itself in, and this is always a little fun. You're a bit blind while you're doing it. And then I take my rod bolt and run it in and get it to just catch. There we go, like that. So I've got the bottom rod bolt in. Then I can rotate the rod down and get the top bolt to go in and catch the end cap like that. And then I take my special bit here, fit it in, and I just want to snug everybody up. So I just do that on the top and the bottom, sort of alternating, so I bring everything up tight evenly. Now before I torque up the bolts, I verify my arrow is pointing to the front. And the other thing I do is I run some wire through the small end and over the cylinder stud rods to keep the rod up and off the engine case. That just is a little extra protection while I'm torquing up the bolts. Since the cylinder studs get in my way, I take a couple of long extensions so I can get out of the range of these with my torque wrench. And I use a 13mm deep socket and put the special wrench into that. Then I can put that in to the bolt like that, get my torque wrench on the end, and I don't run into the end of the cylinder stud rods. Now the drill is to snug up the bolts and then back them off a quarter turn, and then use 36 foot-pounds And you want to tighten this all up in one smooth motion. And that's got that one tight. And we'll go get the bottom one. Same basic technique. It's snug, and then I'm going to back it off a quarter turn and then set my wrench and get it all in one nice smooth motion. And there you go. So, connecting rod is attached. So I'm going to install the cam followers back in their holes, and this is the exhaust and this is the intake, and I took them out. I put them in a baggie with a label because I want to make sure the followers go exactly where they came from, because the face of the follower has had a chance to mate on the cam lobe, so I want to make the lobes match up with the same cam follower. Now I'm going to use some of the assembly lube with Molly that I used to put the connecting rods in, and I put a bunch of it on the face and also some of it around the sides, because I don't want these to have any metal-to-metal contact when the engine starts either. And then I'll make sure I put the left exhaust into the left exhaust. There we go. And I'll just continue doing that for the others, so that'll be the intake and we'll be all done.